Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today our guest is someone who started in a completely different field, dentistry to be exact, and has since become a respected figure in the fitness industry for his no-nonsense approach to health and wellness. Joining me today is Dr. Allan, a man who has taken his deep understanding of science and applied it to help people improve their fitness journeys. We start with getting into some of the nitty-gritty behind EMG and why, as a sole measure of the effectiveness of various exercises for hypertrophy, it might be troublesome and misleading. Allan then shares his go-to methods for gauging muscle growth and why there's so much more to consider than just the data points from EMG. And of course, we couldn't ignore the big buzz in the fitness world that are GLP-1 agonists. Allan breaks down how these drugs work, their role in weight management, and the potential downsides you need to be aware of if you're considering them. We also tackle some of the myths circulating online, including those promoted by the glucose goddess. Allan shares his take on her specific protocols for managing blood sugar spikes and whether you should really be paying that much attention to your blood glucose levels throughout the day. Finally, we zoom out to look at the bigger picture and how essential it is to focus on foundational health principles like eating whole food, staying active, and managing stress without getting lost in the details. So guys, please, if you did enjoy this episode, make sure to give us a review over on Spotify. 5 out of 5 would be fantastic. Do share it with anyone you think might find it interesting. Tag myself and Allan over on social media. All of his handles and how to find out more about him is always linked in the description, so you can find that. And as ever, I appreciate you, but without further ado, let's get into the show. So Allan, you have a doctorate in dentistry, which I find very interesting. And I wanted to first of all ask, are you still in dentistry? Have you completely shifted to the fitness industry? Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't know how I came across you initially, but I started following you on Instagram because I was like, I want to see this guy's doing good stuff. And I probably want to scout him to come on the podcast. This is something I do. I follow people on Instagram for a little bit and stalk them. And so you're here, but then I dug into you and I was like, oh, he's actually in a dentist. And I guess I should have known from some of your videos of what you're wearing. But yeah, I wanted to ask if you're still doing that and go from there.
I'm not. So it was a bittersweet retirement from dentistry. And it's a little of a long story, but it actually makes sense with how my life kind of evolved. And so what ended up happening was my father ended up getting throat cancer that ultimately ended up taking his life. And he had been a doctor for 35 years. And there was a conversation that I had with him towards the end. And I said, hey, if you were given the chance to do things over, what would you do? And he said something that really stuck with me. He mentioned that he wished that he would have had a better work-life balance, more time to spend with family. And at the same time, December 24th, 8:30 p.m., I'm doing surgery, emergency surgery for somebody, and I'm missing out on dinner, Christmas Eve dinner with the in-laws. And so, at that point, I thought, hey, maybe looking into a career shift into something that I'm super passionate about could be really helpful. I had lifted for the majority of my life, was always training friends and family, that type of thing on the side. And I turned to my wife and I said, hey, would you be interested in starting up a training company? Worst case scenario, we do this on the side. We make a little bit extra money. We have something for tax write-offs if we want to buy gym clothes and we'll have some fun. And she was a great natural compliment to me because she was a CrossFit regionals qualified athlete. She went to Worlds in Olympic weightlifting and got silver in Worlds in 2019. And so we had the good ability to be able to handle a large portion of people. I mean, I could do really well with bodybuilding and powerlifting and general health, and she could help CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting. So we complemented each other really well. So we started up Maui Athletics. And for multiple years afterwards, I was coaching as a full-time job, and I was still doing dental surgery as a full-time job. And after 2 years, it ended up working out that the coaching business took off, and it was enough to sustain a good quality of life. And for me, a good quality of life is, can I go to a restaurant occasionally and not have to nitpick, how much something costs on a menu? If I can do that, things are working out pretty well. And so switched to coaching full time. And I've been doing that for many years ever since. It's been a really rewarding thing. I get a little bit more days off. And for people that are familiar with the name of my company, it's Maui Athletics because we live on Maui. And so it gives me the ability to essentially work remotely, since I do online coaching with people from the beach. And that's, something that you can't really beat.
Wow. Okay. I had no idea of your backstory. I'm glad I asked, and I'm sorry if it was like obviously it's a very emotional subject. And I'm sorry to hear about your dad's passing, especially through cancer. It's such an evil disease that hopefully one day we'll be able to solve something there. Maybe AI will be able to help in that arena as well. But amazing to hear about your transition from dentistry to where you are now, and yeah, wanting that better work-life balance. And actually, I guess you're a little bit that stereotypical online coach now, like sipping margaritas on the beach with your laptop, but it probably is sort of quite that.
Yeah, I mean, you know the struggle with social media, creation of all the content, trying to keep up with your entire client load, and do the best you can. So of course there are a lot of hardworking times, but yeah, I mean, it does allow me to have a better work-life balance, and ultimately, even with the things like my father's cancer diagnosis. I mean, when I'm working in this type of profession, it's one of those things that I can look at and say, hey, look, if I can help um, get people to essentially, clean up their life, and revamp their nutrition, and revamp their training and sleep, maybe we can avoid some of these situations that my family has experienced. And so at this stage in my life, it's been long enough since then that it's not um, an off-topic conversation, but I bring it up because I think that it's important for people to understand that health is one of those things that there's no better time to start taking control of it than today. And we always put these types of things off. I know my father did. He always got caught up in work and said, I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to do all these other things that could have potentially prevented it. And when I'm talking with clients, I think that's one of the biggest messages, is that, hey, look, I know that physique and performance are typically at the forefront of people's minds, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Any motivation that you can have to take those first steps that really build this lifestyle, you want to take a hold of. However, these are some of the other benefits that you don't think about. And if this can be something that can motivate anybody to get started, even by yourself at home, it's absolutely worthwhile to bring these types of things up. And the payoffs for the hard work that you put in health and fitness are immeasurable over life.
Couldn't have put it better myself. It's massively cliche to say it, isn't it? But health
Mhm.
is wealth. Like that is like completely what it's about. I find as I'm getting older into my mid 30s now, that it's the more I think about mortality. And so it's more and more like emphasizing those things. And I become grateful for my younger self having found natural bodybuilding so soon, where I'm just like, oh, there's so many behaviors and habits that I've developed through this that are going to actually help me when I'm older now. So that's
Mhm.
cool. So I appreciate your insights there. And I think it's something to really hold on to and remember as well, because people get upset about, I don't know, I didn't lose this much weight on the week, or my physique isn't quite as muscular as this person I've seen online. It's like, yeah, but everything you're doing it's not just that outcome goal. It's also the health and
Exactly.
longevity later. And it helps in so many arenas in life too.
Yeah, we focus so much on those outcome-based goals, right? What did the scale do? What did my bench press do? When in reality, those are the things that we don't have any control over. And setting outcome-based goals is one of the main ways that people experience burnout, because a couple things happen. Well, one of two things happens. Either you reach that outcome-based goal, people will often say, hey, I want to be 160 pounds or whatever it is. And then you lose that drive to continue forward because you've reached your goal and you didn't have anything else to fully motivate you through that. Or you don't reach that goal and you feel like a failure. And so, to your point, those outcome based goals tend to become some of the really problematic things that we set up if we want to have long term success, instead of focusing on things like those habit and routine based goals. How many steps can I roughly take per day? How much can I sleep per night? How often can I get to the gym? The one thing that you can fully control pretty much at all times is what you put in your mouth. And this isn't an old school bodybuilder saying, hey, you need to eat, boiled broccoli and chicken. It's saying, hey, look, you have the ability to meal prep a couple times a week. So you have some more whole, minimally processed foods on hand. Sure, there's room for those more discretionary calories to indulge yourself, to keep yourself on track, but you don't have to rely on those foods or fast foods or pre-cooked foods or, pre-made foods that we're tending to when we start to get into this stressful, busy environment. And these simple changes are what can make those long-term benefits come to play if we just start to put forward the effort to plan ahead.
Yeah, very well said. Actually, to come back to something you said, you mentioned the people you're coaching. It sounds like they're powerlifters and bodybuilders, or people looking to get stronger and more jacked. Basically,
Mhm.
is that because you were competitive in those areas? What's your kind of background? I'd be really interested because I mean, I can tell from your videos, and you sat there. You're a jacked dude, so you
So
clearly have put in the time.
I am not, I've never competed. I'm a hobbyist bodybuilder. I'm a hobbyist power lifter. I have fun doing it. Um, I think the majority of my clientele are, the 9 to 5 working adults that are very successful in other parts of their life and are just having problems transferring that over um, to health and fitness. And it's funny because, um, people always talk about that willpower aspect of things. And these are people that clearly have a lot of willpower. It's a lot of doctors. It's a lot of lawyers. It's a lot of, engineers. And I think that the lack of education and the lack of feeling like there are distinct results very quickly can keep people from pushing through these types of things. But just like we talked about before, I mean, all of the benefits seem to come after an entire lifestyle shift rather than those first few months that people really want to see them. And so I haven't had a competitive experience myself as a rope competitor, but it's one of those things that I've always trained as if I was.
Do you have any prospects of doing it, or is it something that you're like, never say never, but probably not?
Probably not at this point. I mean, I'm going to be in, heavy masters. I'm 43. And so it's going to be a point where it's difficult for me living where I live. There's not a whole lot of meets. I'm at an outer island, I'm not on Oahu. And then if you want to continue with meets, you may end up having to travel to California, which could be, a good bit of time sink and everything like that. So for now, I'm just having fun, enjoying what I do. I'm going to continue to push myself as if I'm competing. So it's always an option. But, at this point, and I'm sure that you've experienced this too, after training for so many years, challenging yourself becomes one of the main reasons that you continue to do it. In the beginning, going after that discomfort is a turnoff for a lot of people. But then it becomes, hey, what can I actually do? How far can I take this? And that becomes something that you end up coming back for, which is an incredible mental shift along a health and fitness journey. But it really does keep you going. And, if you can get to that stage, more power to you, because it's an amazing place to be.
Yeah, there's some comfort in the discomfort almost. I mean, that's what they say, right? Try and make the uncomfortable comfortable kind of thing. And it's always more uncomfortable if I'm doing like a deload or taking time away. It's like I know I need it because I can't push myself. I've got too much fatigue, but something feels wrong about not going into the gym and pushing hard again today in some
Mhm.
way. So it's the same. Actually, that's something it was interested to hear your kind of work-life balance now. Is that anything you ever struggle with that, like making sure you keep it balanced? Because typically I find people who are very good, like bodybuilders or enthusiasts who like pushing hard with work too, they kind of like pushing that too and struggle pulling back on that front.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I find is problematic. There will be days where I'll end up working for 12 or 14 hours. And for me, it's I have to get done certain chunks of whatever I want to get done for a week. Like I've got to get this reel done for social media for tomorrow, or I've got to get these two, programs written, or I've got to get, X done. And I tend to push through until I finish up. So it's funny, I switched this career for a better work-life balance, and then some days, that kind of goes out the window. And I think that that's anything. I think that that's something that anybody that has a drive to really succeed faces. And I think that you probably understand this as well. When you're putting out your own content or when you're working on your own business, not doing it all the way, it grates at you. You're like, I need to finish this, and I need it to be as good as it can possibly be, because this reflects on me. And it's important to me to put out a really good, either really good information, a really good product, a really good program to help my clients as much as I possibly can. And I think that any small business owner that really values their business can understand that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a little bit different when you're working for someone else and all your
Mhm.
time and energy seems to be building, I don't know, making their pockets bigger, full of more money and cash. Whereas at least for you, hey, if I'm putting more time and effort into anything I'm doing, it's building my business bigger. And that's ultimately for a lot of us. Obviously, there's the monetary side, which we have to take into consideration. But I think if you're doing it for kind of quote unquote the right reasons as well, you're trying to help as many people as possible. Generally they're tied. The more kind of income you're making, the more influence you're having, and the more help people you're helping. And so, yeah, it can totally get tempting to not switch off.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all tied together, and certainly people should be compensated for the effort and the time they put in, particularly if they put out a good product. But like you said, I mean, if you can really help people, that's where it becomes a sustainable thing for you mentally and emotionally. And I think that that's where the real payoffs are, as long as you're able to pay your bills and everything. Then being able to see the difference that you're making with people really makes a difference for you as a business owner.
For sure. And you mentioned actually putting out reels. And we obviously, for the listeners, might not know, but if they don't follow us on Instagram, they should. That'll be linked in the description for us both. And we did a collaborative reel on EMG. And I was actually really impressed by your turnaround time, by the way, because I've worked with people on projects before. It could be a variety of things, but I basically sent you everything across and you had everything done basically within like the day. So I was very
It's
impressed by
usually
that.
it's usually 24 or 48 hours. Remember when I was talking about the fact that I get neurotic and I got to get things done, and sometimes it becomes 12-hour days? That's what ends
Yes.
up happening.
Okay.
But it's good because whenever I work with people, I want them to understand that I'm going to really put effort into it, and I'm going to be as reliable as possible. And I know that your reputation is on the line with these types of things. Not that reels are the be all end all to reputation in the industry, but if you're going to do it right.
Yeah.
And do the research, as best as you possibly can. I mean, we're obviously all going to be wrong at some time, but obviously do the best that you can. I'm still at that stage where I do all my own video editing and stuff like that. So I'm not held back essentially by a video editor as far as timing goes. So I can usually pump them out pretty well if I've got a chunk of time to be able to sit down there and get that done.
It's funny you mentioned that. That's something I've also found hard to delegate things. Like I still edit all my stuff. It's probably obvious, to be honest, because it's yours are done to a better standard than me. But I always disliked knowing that I had to rely upon someone else to do it. And I think you have to, at a certain time as a business owner, if you want to get to a certain level of growth, like outsource that. But if
You'll
I've got the
have to.
time, I want
Yeah.
to at the moment, at least.
Yeah. I tried working with people for a while, and it wasn't that the products weren't good. It's that, I mean, whenever I do mine, there's a lot of like skits involved to keep things interesting. I mean, I did one this morning where I did a debunking of dangers of creatine and protein, which is a rather straightforward topic. But to make that more interesting, I did a whole Jeopardy episode. And so that was posted this morning. And these are the types of things where if you're working with a professional editor, they're like, what the hell do you want me to do in this situation? And a lot of the good ideas and fun parts of the reels comes up in the creation process. So I'll be sitting there editing, and if an editor was doing it, they would go out and they would find their B-roll or whatever sounds that they're looking for to add in. And as I'm looking through all these different things, I'll find something that'll, spark a, hey, look, if I put this in, it'll make it so much better. And so I love having that hands-on ability to make these. But you're exactly right. This is not a sustainable model for long-term, particularly as you grow and grow.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. So coming back to the one we did, the collaboration
Sure.
was on EMG, which I think we've probably spoken about on the podcast, but not for a long time. And as your reel kind of made clear, sometimes I'm shocked by some of the what's it called, your reaction content, because I'm like, where are you finding these videos to react to? They don't come up on my like explore feed, so you're kind of in the crevices of Instagram there, or it's probably not actually. You're just more the broader, more wide open fitness space. But
Sure.
a lot of people are kind of spouting these are the best exercises because of these studies which clearly show there's more activation in these muscle groups. And I'd love for you to kind of dig into the relevance of EMG as a proxy and how reliable is it for measuring hypertrophy.
So EMG can give us information. The problem is we're typically not using it in the right way, and it's probably not a good indicator. It's probably not a good sole indicator of the worth of an exercise. You can typically figure out based on understanding of exercise and movement what the main movers are going to be, main moving muscles are going to be for something. So then what ends up happening is a lot of fitness personalities will then use EMG to say, hey, look, if we know that this works the glutes and then this works the glutes, then therefore the one with the higher EMG has got to be the better exercise for hypertrophy. And unfortunately, that doesn't end up being true because of a lot of potential errors along the way. And even when you look at most of the research, there are multiple errors that can be made, and at least one is typically happening within each thing. For instance, um, you have to normalize exercise intensity, and that's very difficult when you're doing different exercises. So, say we'll use the squat and the hip thrust as our example because it's kind of the penultimate example of this conversation. You're going to have to be at relative same percent of one rep maxes. You can't just lift the same weight because it's going to give you varied signaling. You have to avoid submaximal efforts. So you're going to have to take things to essentially momentary muscular failure, because if you're at submaximal efforts, the EMG signaling can be different between different musculature or different movements that can throw that off as well. Same muscle lengths. And this is a really, really big one. And this is one of the issues with testing hip thrusts and a full squat, because you're not going to have the same muscle lengths given the range of motion of hip thrust and the range of motion that you would get in a full squat, which is significantly larger. And then older EMG studies, they lack the standardization of the placements of the electrodes themselves, which can really throw things off. And I think that even knowing all these things, people really need to understand, and we touched on this in the reel that we did, EMG was never meant to be used to identify hypertrophy. It can be used to give us some information about hypertrophy in conjunction with some other information, such as monitoring, circumference changes and other variables. But it was intended to look at muscular dysfunction and the essentially the impairment or the modification, the errant modification of electrical signaling within the muscles. And so we've taken something that was intended for another purpose, that was really validated for another purpose, and we're trying to extend it into our fitness realm. And it doesn't always work that way. But on the surface, without understanding all those what's working under the hood, it sounds like a great idea. Because, hey, the muscular signal is much higher with this exercise than that exercise. So that must mean that muscle is being worked much more adequately or much more fully. And unfortunately, because of all those different errors, that doesn't necessarily tend to be the case. And in fact, with the hip thrust and the full squat example, the hip thrust comes up with a much higher peak EMG, yet the full squat tends to show greater muscular growth. And so we have direct measurements that counteract the supposed theory of EMG. And in this instance, it's due to likely differences in muscle length and likely differences in intensity normalization. But these are main things that you're going to need to be looking at when somebody proposes that this is what we should look at to identify which is the better exercise. Okay, well, then let's go into the methodology of the studies that are being cited. Let's see if all of these things are being accounted for. If some aren't being accounted for, maybe we take a step back and we say, hey, this is good reference information, but maybe we don't use it as a rote be all and end all to the idea that this is a better exercise than another. And on top of that, it's not a mutually exclusive choice anyways. You don't have to choose between back squat and hip thrust. Maybe you use one as an accessory exercise sometimes. Maybe you make one a premier exercise, one training block, and then the other a premier exercise, another training block. There's nothing wrong with some variation between the way that you train. And there's room for all of these base movements that all have large benefits. And so I think the idea of, hey, we need to identify which is 100% best based on science, maybe going in a little bit of the wrong direction of practical programming. As long as we understand that it's a viable, good exercise, which tends to be the basics that, are able to challenge muscles over significant muscle lengths and, figure out what you feel the most, because certainly, that anecdotal feeling of what works best for you can come into play with motivation and how well you challenge that musculature. And then go from there. I mean, you use all of these bits of information to really figure out what works best for you, rather than focusing on a specific number that may or may not tell you exactly what you think it's telling you.
Very well said. Yeah, I think unfortunately people like black and white answers. And if there's something, it's like, oh, this can tell me what muscles being worked the most, and therefore this is better. It's like, well, it can probably tell you what muscles are contracting, but it's like you
Yeah.
said here, we have literal evidence, which is shows, for example, you said like longer muscle lengths. Well, EMG biases short muscle lengths, and it's like,
Yep.
well, EMG biases lower reps versus higher reps, or higher loads versus lower loads. It's like, but we have research indicating that you can grow just as well from both. So it's kind of like
Right.
how, as we dig into it, it seems like this tool is becoming less and less helpful. You did mention kind of what you perceive as an individual, and that is something I wanted to ask. In terms of proxies for hypertrophy, is there anything you use, like short-term feedback tools, to give you insights into what you think might be working better or worse?
So I like to use a combination of things. I like to use perceived exertion. I mean, when I use training protocols, I do reps in reserve, but there are four things that I talk about with people of saying, hey, look, if we're trying to figure out how well this is working for an individual, there doesn't appear to be a single metric that works the best. So I like to use four metrics. I like to use perceived exertion, because understanding that um, you should probably be working in proximity to failure, and over time you can train to get that feeling of where failure may be, and you can even test that through intensity tests. And this is something that I do with my clients. If we're working in reps in reserve, you've got a beginner trainee, and they can work anywhere from 1 to 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 reps in reserve and still progress really well. As you become more advanced, you're going to start having to tighten that up. Maybe you get to the 1 to 2, 0, 1, 2 as some of your base, but you can test this. And so if you say to a person, hey, I want you to work, 1 rep in reserve, they choose the weight. They say, okay, I feel like I'm working with that. All right, well, let's test this one day. Take that weight that you believe is 1 rep short of your failure, and then take that set out until momentary muscular failure, where you fail in the middle of the rep and you cannot get any more. If you're absolutely right, you should be able to get 1 more rep than you were previously getting. If you're getting more, then we know that it is slightly different, that you can probably lift a little bit more weight. Then you up the weight, try the set the next time, and then you see what that feels like, and you start to get a better idea of what perceived exertion feels like. So perceived exertion is a great one. Soreness and fatigue. I have people look for signs of modest post-exercise soreness and fatigue in musculature that tends to get sore. Again, remember that these are all part of an understanding of a whole. And people will say, well, soreness is not the greatest indicator of hypertrophy. And they're 100% correct, because there's genetic differences. There's differences in the musculature that you use. There's differences in whether or not you are experienced in that training style or movement or whatever it is. If you're less experienced, you're certainly going to be more sore when you first start out. And then hydration status plays a large part of it. But assuming we're, a few weeks out of training a certain musculature, you can monitor that. And in muscles that you genetically tend to get a little bit more sore in, having a little bit of soreness that's not debilitating, but is there, can be a sign that you've worked the muscle pretty well. Performance. This should be maintained and slowly progressed over a cycle. And certainly if you're a beginner, it's going to be progressed more quickly, week to week even. As you get more advanced into very advanced, you may not progress over months, but that doesn't mean that progressive overload isn't still in play, because you're attempting to increase weight, reps, density, whatever it is, over time. And then lastly, I actually look at pump, a residual pump after target muscles. And this may not have as significant, it may not be as significant in certain musculature as others, just like soreness may not be. Some muscles will be more prone to soreness to a pump than others. Arms, delts tend to be pretty prone compared to some other musculature. But these four things in combination, I'll take a look at, and I'll ask, the person that I'm working with, okay, well, what do you feel about this? What do you feel about this one? What do you feel about this one? And we can take those bits of information as a whole and say, hey, look, based on what you're telling me here, you're hydrated, you're getting your sleep, you've been progressively overloading over time, you're getting a little bit sore in some of these exercises, not so much in others. Things seem to be moving along pretty well. Because unfortunately, we can't use something like EMG to really tell, if progress is happening. But these four things in combination with monitoring rate of gain, if you're trying to build, rate of loss, if you're trying to lose, and then some circumference measurements can give you a lot of really good information.
Yeah, I really like the way you laid that out in terms of there's no one be all. If there was one be all and end all, I would say it's performance. But hey,
Yes, yeah, I agree with you.
Unless there's unless you're a newbie, it's one that isn't very helpful in the short term to tell you what kind of how much is going on. So then I like that you have, and it's something I've come to too, where you have like multiple kind of biofeedback where it's this, then you can triangulate. It's like you can't just chase soreness, you can't just chase pump. You
Right.
need to kind of keep them all within a certain range. And I completely agree that, yeah, if you focus too hard on one, it's going to lead you the wrong direction. I always think about the pump I can achieve in some muscles. I can get a crazy pump in like chest, quads, calves, but I'm never going to get that sort of pump in my back. My back just
Right.
doesn't really get that sort of pump. But then I focus more on another proxy. One I like is like local disruption or fatigue to the target muscle even.
Mhm.
And that's something that I also like. But yeah, otherwise, it's like you said, none of these can be like your holy grail and you can't focus too hard on one, but we don't really have anything else. And performance can't be used super clearly unless like you're more of a novice to know how things are going in the short term.
I mean, your comment of performance probably being number one, I 100% agree with that. And if I had to say, if you want to do a combo, performance and then rate of loss or gain are the two most important things.
Yeah.
And I say that because if you want to gain lean muscle, the fact that you are increasing your performance over time, you're lifting heavier weights over time or whatever it is, there's no way that that can continue and you don't gain lean muscle. It will eventually plateau if if you're not making the right choices. On top of that, if you're trying to gain lean muscle, monitoring the rate of gain and being in a proper rate of gain on the scale will also give you an indicator of whether or not you're moving in the right direction. So if strength is going up and weight is going up at the right rate of gain for if your goal is to get stronger or build lean muscle, then that's probably a really good indication that you're doing what you need to do and to calm down, trust the process, and keep going.
Yeah, it's that, especially when you get to, I'm imagining you've been training over a decade as well, Alan. And like once you've been training that long, gains are slow to come by. It's like watching paint dry at some point. And
Oh
so,
yeah,
like you said,
absolutely.
you have to trust in the process. And I mean, it's an easy thing to trust because we know the science. Like, hey, if you're training this close to failure with sufficient volume, which you more than likely are, especially if you're feeling pretty fatigued and tired, you're getting a pump, you're getting some soreness, then you just have to kind of keep going and trust that muscle growth is happening underneath the hood in a sense, and it will show. And that's where I think, unfortunately, especially in gaining phases, people get a bit complacent and they end up not really eating enough, not challenging themselves quite enough, and therefore they don't grow. They don't get those advanced muscle gains, which make you kind of stand out from the norm.
Yeah, I think that this is considered heresy every time I say it, but I always think that bulking itself is probably the toughest thing that you can do. And when I say that, I get pushback a lot of time, and you can disagree with me, and I'm okay with that. This is an opinion. This isn't.
For me,
This
it's
is not a science
harder
fact.
too.
Is it harder for you to bulk?
Absolutely, yeah.
So here's my feeling on that. When you're cutting, you can see distinct signs of progress every week or two or three. I mean, you've got the feedback. You can either see it in the mirror, you can see it on the scale, you can see it in circumference measurements, that things are going down. When you're bulking, typically, people will think that their body composition is looking worse before it looks better. So there's a big trust the process type of thing. And outside of newbie gains, it's a very, very slow process. On top of that, if your goal is to bulk and gain as much lean muscle as possible and as little fat as possible, the majority of your diet is still going to be coming from whole minimally processed foods. Now, certainly there's going to be room for some more discretionary calories, and that's okay. But people who typically fight a lot about this, they'll be like, well, bulking is really easy. I can gain weight. And I'm like, I'm not talking about gaining weight. I'm talking about gaining lean muscle well without at the same time, gaining excess amounts of body fat. And certainly some body fat is expected when you're bulking correctly. But it becomes difficult because you're eating large volumes of food. You are cooking a lot more. You're doing a lot more dishes. It feels like the process is like watching paint dry. And all of these things are absolutely true. And so, cutting for me is, and from probably the majority of my clients, is easier because there's that distinct, I know that this is working. You do less dishes, you stuff yourself less. Now, certainly there are going to be large portions of the population that face different challenges. I mean, there are people with discordant hunger cues, and this is one of the problems with some severe obesity. You lose body fat and you face a much higher hunger drive than some other people. So when people say, hey, cutting for me is a hell of a lot harder, it may be for that specific person. And if you look at research from Hall out of the NIH, one of the things that he has shown is discordant hunger cues for the previously obese can be as high as a drive for 100 extra calories per day per kilogram of body weight lost. That is an absolutely enormous amount of increased hunger drive. Now, it doesn't always get that high. But as an example, you could have a person, and I'm going to use lighter weights just because it's easier for me to do the math. If you've got a person that's 180 pounds and they drop to 150 pounds, their drive will be different likely for food than somebody who had always been 150 pounds, even though they're both 150 pounds now. So this is one of the reasons we likely see the recidivism rates in all of this weight regain, because these people are facing an extra challenge that others aren't. So if this is your challenge, certainly fat loss can be harder, but I think in many cases the bulking can be more difficult because there's less of that motivating factor of seeing, hey, what I'm doing is really paying off, instead of the viewpoint that we have of, oh man, I'm just getting puffy.
Yeah. Yeah, for your average person, for the average person I work with, at least, definitely that kind of diligence in their gaining phase, not just to gain weight, to gain good weight. Like you said,
Yeah.
there's a difference between gain. It's similar, like, hey, it's not just losing weight, it's losing fat. So you maintain the muscle. Same here. It's not just gaining weight, it's gaining muscle with
Muscle,
some
yeah.
tag along fat. Unfortunately, it's kind of the cost of doing business. I always see it as.
And I
But
think that I think that there's a mental component to that too, where mentally people will say, okay, well, I'm in a calorie surplus, and therefore I'll go off plan a little bit more. And certainly, yes, relatively, you can probably eat a little bit more calories off plan and not throw your progress off. But that off plan day ends up becoming, you're watching Premier League, and you've now had 6 beers and, fish and chips and whatever it is, and that's really thrown you off. See, if I was talking to anybody else, I would be using NFL Sunday, but we're making this
you got it.
for the audience here.
Yeah, the football, not the soccer, right? Those were some good ones. And yeah, fish and chips, that would be great right now. But I agree with you, though. I think it's that they kind of want that reprieve, and that kind of, they don't want to kind of continue to feel like they're restricting themselves. And it's kind of that whole, I don't know, I see that trope, and I haven't seen it for a while, but it's like, oh, calories don't count at Christmas or your birthday or whatever. It's like, I understand wanting some more freedom, but they still
Yeah.
count, just like spending money counts whenever you spend it. There's still debt to pay off at some point.
Well, and you brought up a concept earlier that I really like, because I think that it shows that you're an experienced coach and you know what really matters. You had talked earlier about habits and how you had formed them at a younger age, and that's probably something that's been really beneficial for you. I think what a lot of people don't realize when they're first trying to make this shift into a more healthier or fitness related lifestyle is that the habits and routines, like we talked about with goal setting, it's far more important than anything else. And so when you have a holiday, you have, a special occasion, you have a vacation or whatever it is, that doesn't mean go back to what you did before because this is time off. There's never time off. That doesn't mean that there isn't time to relax a little bit, but understand too that learning to work through these phases where you are allowing yourself to be a little bit more indulgent is a skill as well. And it's something that we need to work on, because if we don't work on that, those are the time periods where we're going to fall off plan and revert back to what we did before. So what you were saying there about, hey, I've got a special occasion, that the healthy lifestyle is still part of that. That's true. And so that's where you choose to moderate a little bit more than what you would have had in the past, to allow those habits to continue to be worked on and to allow you to gain that ability to work through these more difficult times.
Yeah,
And so
I
I think that
completely
this is
agree.
one of the things, I think that this is one of the things that people really tend to overlook when they get into these situations.
Yeah, it's almost you do it and I do it, and I'm sure lots of the listeners do, but maybe some don't. We identify as a certain person and live a certain way. So it's like, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger says he still trains. It's like brushing his teeth. He's just going to do it. So a lot of these behaviors and habits, they're just part of our lifestyle. So it's like, hey, even though it's whatever occasion, I'm still going to make sure to get as good sleep as possible. I'm still going to make sure not to binge my face off, because I know long term that's not something that I'm going to be happy with in the future. So it just takes a while to develop them.
It does. It does. And there's research on habit formation. And I want to bring this up just really quickly because it can help people get through this type of thing. When you look at forming habits, the amount of time that it takes on average is between 18 and 256 days for 95% of habit formation. That is a massive range. And I bring this up because if you're trying to make a lifestyle change, people always hear that phrase. I mean, you might have heard this phrase before, where people say it takes 30 days to make a habit, or it's 90 days to make a habit, or whatever it is. Well, that falls within the range. But just because you don't feel 100% comfortable and things aren't on autopilot within 90 days doesn't mean that you've screwed up. And more importantly than understanding that the habit formation process can take upwards of nearly a year, it's important to understand that, again, when you look at this research, if you make a mistake, and everybody here is going to make a mistake, you're going to have, a day where you're like, I just don't want to go to the gym. Like, that's the last thing that I want to do. Or I just don't want to eat, I just want to eat a pizza, or whatever it is. Being thrown off track does not doom this habit formation process. The important thing was, as long as you get back on track at the next chance to be able to do that habit, it doesn't throw off the habit formation process. And so knowing that it's going to take time, and also knowing that you have the chance to screw up and you have not wasted your efforts, as long as you say, hey, look, I was listening to Steve and Allan, and they said that if I just get right back on track, things are going to be okay. You force yourself to do it, because sometimes all you got to do is put your head down and make it happen. You'll be just fine. And so understanding these two things can really make a huge difference in this journey, whether your goal is to step foot on a bodybuilding stage, whether it's to just be healthier for your kids, or whether it's just to age as best as you possibly want to. These habits and routines will bring you through to whatever goal you have.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. It makes me think of the philosophy of the original philosophy of like flexible dieting, where it was like, hey, if you screw up your diet one day, get back onto the plan. That was kind of one of the main philosophies behind it. But it also makes me think about bad habits, where it's like, hey, if you do I imagine it's similar, like good or bad, it's just a habit. So
Yeah.
if you end up doing a bad habit that you're trying not to do, it's not like that suddenly puts you back on that path of, oh, you're doomed for all the bad habits now. It's like, no, you can get back onto not doing it, and that's going to see you forward. Because yeah, like you said, even I know myself, not that this is like an extreme bad habit or something, but I try and not have caffeine past a certain point and a certain quantity. But sometimes I break that rule because, I don't know, I need a 12-hour workday or what have you. I've got stuff to do, and I just it catches me. And then the next day I'm like, man, I shouldn't have done that. My sleep wasn't as good. I'm not going to do it again. And then I've got like months of stretch until I break that again. It
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, it does. And, for people that are going out on these types of journeys and trying to better themselves, you got to understand that, like, even Steve messes up. So it's okay. You can
I
do
tried
it.
to be a robot.
If the people that essentially live the lifestyle face these challenges that you face, then, you have the ability to get through. It seems easier for your coach, or the fitness personality that you look up to, because they gained this understanding, because they formed these habits, and because they made it parts of their lifestyle. And so by just getting that understanding, it really puts you on that road to make that a success for yourself as well.
See the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. Additionally, you get access to our exclusive Revive Stronger member site, where you'll be able to watch over hundreds of hours worth of educational content. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
For sure. And something I really wanted to tag on to was, you mentioned, obviously your biases, and mine is too, that muscle gain is harder than fat loss. But there are people out there who fat loss is absolutely harder, and they would be in the same situation as us, but feeling it 10 times worse. They could possibly never get to stage ready levels of condition because their body just fights against them too much. And
Sure.
one of the new advents that a lot of people will be familiar of, and something that hasn't been covered on the podcast yet, and I know you've done a bit of content on it, and I'd love to talk about it a bit because I'd love to learn more about it too, is the GLP-1 agonist. So people might have heard of Semaglutide. There's actually loads now, like I've heard loads of different names, but that was the one I kind of was aware of. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are generally around that, like maybe discuss kind of what they are and then how you see them fitting in within people's goals.
So semaglutide is it's a GLP-1 agonist or GLP-1 mimetic, and its main mechanism, the way that it works, and when you talked about all the different names, those are just different brand names for whatever specific purpose it is, like Wegovy, Ozempic, all those types of things. One is to treat diabetes, another one is specifically for weight loss. They're the same drug, it's just marketed differently. The way that it works mainly is through lowering of appetite. And I'm a fan of these drugs. However, I think that they're being abused right now. And I think that if we're using them without fully understanding how to use them correctly, we're probably going to have an epidemic of problems here in 10 to 20 years, particularly if it continues to ramp up in the way that it is. And certainly, in something like weight loss and when vanity is in play, and again, vanity is not necessarily a bad thing if you're doing it for the right reasons and it can get you going. But if vanity is causing you to do it and do it in the wrong way, that's where it really becomes a problem for me. And so with semaglutide, because it causes such drastic drops in appetite, it seems to work very well for weight loss, because if you take in less calories from eating less food, then it causes a net negative energy balance and you lose body weight. It has some data suggesting that it helps preserve lean muscle, but the problem is, in many cases, it doesn't seem to have an effect that is so large that it counterbalances the lack of proper nutrition and proper weight training. And so people who are indiscriminately taking these just for weight loss, they don't have an eating disorder, they don't have diabetes, and these are the two main reasons. Eating disorder, diabetes, severe obesity are the three main reasons that you would prescribe these medications. And what we're finding is that they're literally being prescribed to anybody that has 10 pounds of body fat to lose, and they shouldn't be. Because 10 pounds of body fat, that moderate range of just overweight, should easily be able to handle this through diet and lifestyle modification. And diet and lifestyle modification will come with far more benefits than taking semaglutide. And so the issue is, as you lose significant amounts of weight, it can come with significant amounts of loss of lean muscle mass, particularly if you don't have the nutrition and the training under control. Because what prevents loss of lean muscle mass while we're losing body weight? It's significant amounts of sleep, 8+ hours of sleep. It is lifting heavy, challenging your musculature. It's getting a high enough protein and then maintaining a moderate calorie deficit. not a severe calorie deficit, which seems to be happening quite a bit with these drugs because people just aren't eating, particularly if they're on some of the higher doses. And so this the the things that I've seen with this drug are from at least clients of mine that have used them in the past is impaired sleep, some GI distress, and then this rapid weight loss. And when people who are taking this without really realizing that you want to moderate the rate at which you lose weight to help preserve lean muscle mass, they're doing it in a this cavalier attitude of, I just want to lose as much weight as I possibly can, as fast as I possibly can, because people don't know the difference. They don't know that this is a really problematic thing. And so we're setting ourselves up for a potential lifetime of problems using the drug in the manner that it's being used right now. Like I said, it's being abused. And I'm of the opinion, and this can never be instituted, but I'm of the opinion that no one should be able to go on this drug without a proper counseling in weight training and nutrition. I mean, optimally, that would be my goal, but it's unfeasible. There's no way that you could ever enforce that. But if we don't get people to start valuing these things, a couple things are going to happen. One, I mean, they're going to fall into those health problems. There's going to be sarcopenia. There's going to be osteoporosis. There's going to be significant malnutrition because you're just not eating, or what you are eating is still garbage, but you're just eating less of the garbage. You're going to lose your future ability to maintain this if you ever want to go off the drug, because the second that you go off the drug, that hunger comes back, but you haven't established any of the habits, routines. You haven't learned to eat correctly for your new body. You haven't learned to make exercise and activity a part of your daily lifestyle that's going to prevent recidivism and prevent that lean muscle loss. And so we're really opening ourselves up to some very big potential problems. And I don't want to sound like that person that's like, oh, these drugs are bad, because I don't think that they are. I think for the right people with the right education and the right coaching, they're absolutely wonderful. It's just not how we're using them right now, because there's this big rush on these because people just want to lose weight. And yeah, I mean, it's going to cause a real potential health problem for some significant number of people, I feel, if we don't really stress the message of, yes, these can be used. Are you somebody that should be using them? And if you are going to use them, are you going to use them in the right way? And the right way still requires you to lift weights. It still requires you to sleep. It still requires you to eat whole minimally processed foods. And yeah, you're going to have to eat a fucking vegetable and a piece of fruit from time to time. These things are really going to still help you, and I think that even speaking with my clients that have been offered this by doctors, none of this discussion is happening. And I have a formal education in medicine myself, and I understand that, fitness and nutrition is not the main purview of your primary care physician. But I want people to advocate for themselves. And if your doctor is recommending this for you, maybe it is something that makes sense for you to take. But then at the same time, also ask them, hey, do you have any recommendations for somebody that I could talk to for fitness and nutrition counseling? Because typically they're aligned with at least a registered dietitian. Maybe you reach out to somebody like Steve. If Steve, you still do online coaching, I think.
Yeah, that's my
based off
bread and butter.
Okay. Reach out to somebody like Steve and say, hey, look, I trust you, man. I heard that podcast. I realize, that this is really important for me. And if you really do want to make this change in your life, yeah, it can be an adjunct, but do it the right way. And then you don't have to worry about this in 10 to 20 years where you've lost so much lean muscle that now you are having problems with injury, because strength and lean muscle is the number one injury prevention thing that you can do in your entire life. It's not stretching, much to the chagrin of all of the 1980s coaches that we had in school. It acts as a metabolic sink, which means you are able to handle glucose better throughout your daily life. You are less prone to metabolic dysfunction. It obviously makes you stronger. It gives you more confidence. There are all these real benefits to maintaining as much lean muscle as possible. Bank as much as you possibly can, as young as you possibly can, and then do what you can to preserve that for as long as possible, because that's what's going to give you the better quality of life later in life. And people get really confused, I think, with these drugs, because if you have significant excess body fat and you take the drugs, your blood work is probably going to improve very dramatically in a positive way early on. These concerns are things that you'll run into years down the road rather than immediately, because you're not immediately going to go into malnutrition. You're not immediately going to get into osteoporosis or lose these significant amounts of lean muscle to where you're going to notice in your everyday life. You're only going to notice positive things. And so being warned ahead of time that this is a potential complication of essentially indiscriminate drug use can allow you to, if you choose to take it and your doctor is behind you, it'll allow you to take it, but it'll allow you to take it and avoid the pitfalls that you may otherwise face.
So well said. Very, very well rounded. As far as like the bits that I've heard about it, I think everything you said there is very, very fair and obviously well researched, because I think some people are like, again, the muscle loss thing, people are very scared about that. But it's like, hey, if you do all the things we know as bodybuilders, like, hey, you weight train, you lose at an appropriate rate of loss, you keep protein high, like, hey, those are all the lifestyle things that you should be educating yourself to kind of ameliorate any of those issues. And it makes me, the immediate thought that came to mind was, I don't know if this happens a lot in the US, but I sometimes see it where I don't know, a young man or a man in general will go to their doctor. They're like, hey, I'm feeling depressed. I've got low energy. And they do like a blood test, they low test, and they're just like, oh, go on TRT. It's like they didn't ask them how their stress levels were, how their sleep was, how their diet is. Are they doing any kind of exercise? All lifestyle things that could bring that back up to a healthy range. And they're on TRT for life now, potentially.
We're not addressing the root cause.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And that's a real issue. And just to point out how poignant and perfect your example is, if you get 8 hours of sleep versus 6.5 for men in the research, your testosterone can be 50% lower. It can be that dramatic. And so, it's difficult for doctors out there. And I'm not one of those people that are like, oh, doctors are out there to get you, or they're just pushing drugs or whatever it is. They have a skill set and they have a lot to learn. And so, there are certainly some doctors that are better than others. There are some that will be like, well, what about this? What about this? With regards to fitness, nutrition, all that kind of stuff, but some won't. And so being your own advocate is really important. And like you said, addressing the root cause is the number one thing. And it's much more important than these drugs, even in combination with these drugs, to get things taken care of. Those changes that you make to lifestyle will be what brings you to ultimate success in a much more healthy manner.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of prescribing it appropriately, like doctors are giving it to people who they could get it done without this. Am I also right thinking that there's like a cost involved, so lots of people who maybe need it aren't able to get it? Is that happening at the moment as well? I don't know. I guess that's more just like general news surrounding it.
At least as of a month ago, the last time that I looked into this was 1 month ago. They're having issues with supply due to demand. And so people that have eating disorders, that have severe obesity, that have diabetes are having issues getting this. And it's an effective drug. And it's a very effective drug in some of these things, and particularly with people with like binge eating disorders. I mean, this could be the drug that really allows them to get control over their life. And yet we're having people that have 20 pounds to lose taking it. And so we worry about your health and we want you to do the right things. And obviously, people like you and I are in this because we really care about the change that we make with people's lives. But there's that whole moral implication of this if you're not really indicated for it. And maybe it makes more sense during these time periods where some other people could really use it to say, hey, look, I'll start to invest in my coaching, getting these other things in line, and then go as far as I can possibly go. And then maybe I'll get the drug later if I really need it. And after giving it a true try, with patients involved and doing it the right way. And then maybe this is still on the table. I'm not saying that it can't ever be on the table for people, but be honest with yourself about one, how much do you really need it? And two, is this potentially taking away from somebody that really could benefit from it?
Yeah, very well said. it makes me think of also, I guess it's in many ways similar to what a gastric band would do for people, where they kind of make the stomach smaller, so you just get full sooner. But it's way less invasive because
Yeah.
it's, I guess, a pill, or I don't know how they administer it, but
Typically injections these days.
right.
But you're right. Gastric band works on a very similar. I mean, the end result is the same thing. You eat
Yeah.
less, and so you get that feeling of distension in your GI tract, and that tells you that you're more full. And so it helps fight through those discordant hunger cues. But that discordant hunger cue that we talked about before, the Hall studies out of the NIH with the increased appetite, especially after losing significant amounts of weight. That's why these drugs work so well. Because these people that have typically fought back against this severe hunger drive, it calms that noise. And so you didn't think in the beginning of this podcast that we were going to be coming full circle, but we had a plan.
There's always a plan. As I told you off air, I always have some sort of script laid out. But yeah, it's the same with gastric bands. They could have all the problems similarly as what the drug there does. So but it's also, coming back to that, it's kind of normalizing someone's hunger cues is the right way to use it. But then with all the lifestyle behaviors and everything in place is the appropriate kind of long-term strategy, because I guess long-term is what we should be caring about, but unfortunately people aren't. So I think we've probably spoken enough about that topic. Unless there's anything else you wanted to add, I think you did a great job of talking about it. We could jump on to another topic.
Yeah, let's go to something else.
Yeah, so something else you've spoken about, and I think we've actually, no, you didn't quite touch on it, but it was the glucose goddess. So some of the listeners might hear that name and know who it is. One, because she's grown on social media. I can't imagine how many followers she has now, but probably too many for the information she's putting out. But also,
certainly too many.
Yeah, certainly too many. And I brought her up to Mike Israetel a while back, and he hadn't heard of her either. So we basically were just talking about some of her content and how it just didn't seem to kind of make sense. And so you've obviously done a 3-part series actually on your Instagram. And I know she advocates, basically, from what I gather, she advocates for protocols for managing blood sugar spikes. And I'd love to hear kind of what your take is on those protocols.
The problem with the protocols that she recommends is, at their core, it's orthorexia nervosa. I mean, it's disordered eating is what she advocates. Now she dresses it up so it doesn't sound like disordered eating, but it's entirely disordered eating. And one of the big things that she does is she recommends continuous glucose monitors. A lot of her content is she'll eat a food and then she'll show what the glucose spike is. She'll eat a different food, she'll show what the glucose spike is, and that seems to be a pretty big mainstay in her social media presence. But the interesting thing is, I mean, the orthorexia nervosa aside, I mean, a person that doesn't have diabetes or metabolic dysfunction should not be using a continuous glucose monitor. There's no information that that's going to give you that will be beneficial to you. And there's no information that that gives you, because an insulin response is a natural part of your body, and it's regulated very well. You don't need to micromanage it. Just because there's a spike doesn't mean that there's a problem. And one of the things that she advocates is eating 2 meals a day or less meals to keep glucose lower throughout the day. But the problem with that is then you're massively spiking it twice a day. So like, if we're concerned about these glucose spikes, why are we not concerned about very large glucose spikes? If we're concerned about insulin release, exercise causes insulin release, and yet that doesn't concern her. And there's a lot of just holes in the theories that are being put out there. And so the reason that I went into this series was to address some of the claims that she was making, because I think that it's doing a lot of harm. It's making people spend money. It's making people become neurotic. It's making people have disordered eating tendencies when you're using a continuous glucose monitor, and then you get afraid to use, to eat certain foods because it raises your blood glucose. I mean, if you don't have a metabolic dysfunction, that's a natural response. Protein's going to raise blood glucose. That doesn't mean that you stop eating protein. I mean, all of these things are perfectly fine because your body is regulated and it can handle it just fine. Another thing that she pushes eating foods in a certain sequence because it lowers the glucose response. And it's 100% true. It does. But again, it doesn't matter. And so we have, and I don't remember the exact, in my in my content, I put the exact thing, but I can't remember it offhand because it's not something that I would ever focus on. But it's, it's eat your carbs this time, then eat your fat next, then eat your protein next, or whatever the sequence is. But again, this is not how people eat normal meals. And if all of a sudden you're wearing your continuous glucose monitor and then you're separating all your food, so all the carbs are in one pile, all the proteins in another pile, and all the fats are in one pile, you're going to look like a crazy person whenever you're going out to eat. And this is the thing where we're really throwing people off. We're really making them focus on the things that just don't matter. And then the last thing that I remember that she was very, very focused on was meal frequency. And I'm sure that you're aware of the research out there on meal frequency. Number of meals per day has no bearing on body fat loss. The calorie deficit is what controls that entire situation. If you look at every study that's ever been done on it, there's only one outlier study. I never know how to pronounce the guy's name. It's IWAO. And if you do a sensitivity analysis and remove that one out of the equation, literally every other study that's ever been done on meal frequency agrees that you can't stoke the metabolic fire, which was opposite of her claim anyways, where it was you have to have 2 meals a day, which massively, spikes glucose at one point, but then you're steady at another point in time, rather than just having a more steady time throughout the day. So all of these attempts at micromanaging glucose are very problematic because there's no practical health benefit. There's never been shown to be a practical health benefit for any of these things in a person that doesn't have metabolic dysfunction. Now, if you've got diabetes, yes, please wear a continuous glucose monitor if you're being told to do that by your doctor. Please manage your glucose through number of meals as best as possible. But even when you do it for diabetes, typically you would do multiple meals spread throughout the day with a relatively even distribution of carbs to normalize. You would do the opposite of what she says when you're actually treating diabetics. And so she's using spurious reasoning, and she's using molecular or metabolic data that does not actually yield a practical beneficial health outcome. And what it's doing is it's causing people to have butter on one side of their plate, chicken on another side, and peas on another side of their plate, and then eating them in this bizarre order to somehow lower their blood glucose, in some kind of vain attempt to be unique in the message that you put out there. And there's a reason that there are very few people that professionals that put out this message of overall glucose managing. Now, certainly there are some, but it doesn't catch on with the general consensus of the professionals out there because it's unwarranted. And so it's a funny concept to bring up because you look at every one of these claims and you're like, but you could counter this with the exercise resistant insulin. Okay, but that's okay. Well, why is that one okay? But then it's not okay when I eat it and then my body controls it just fine and my fasting blood glucose is completely normal. People treat ourselves in the social media space as if we're built by paper mache. And the littlest change in homeostasis is going to completely break us. You see this with cortisol. You see this with insulin. You see this with people going through menopause. You see this with cycle syncing. Women and people with metabolic dysfunction are prime targets for these things because hormones are very scary sounding. And that's if you don't understand that these hormones in our bodies can only really be problematic when they're dysregulated. Insulin is a very beneficial hormone. Cortisol is a very beneficial hormone. And if we turn them into the villains, we're not recognizing all of the benefits that they bring us, particularly if you're an otherwise healthy person and particularly under certain circumstances. The cortisol raise after exercise is a wonderful beneficial thing. Cortisol can aid in fat loss. It increases hormone-sensitive lipase. In the presence of a calorie deficit, cortisol, assuming it's not a chronic problematic exposure, is a benefit to things like fat loss. Yet you don't hear that very often. You hear, oh, cortisol's bad. Let's try to regulate this. Insulin's bad. Let's try to micromanage this. And by trying to micromanage our hormones, we're creating problematic practices in our daily life. We're spending money on supplements that make no sense and are probably causing your body problems, because if it does affect cortisol or insulin or these other things, it's throwing off your natural response that is actually bringing you to homeostasis just fine. And, this is a similar thing. Estrogen. Estrogen is a very beneficial hormone, even in men. If you tank your estrogen, your joints will tell you very quickly how bad it is to not have estrogen in your body. And so we do the same things with this. We try to micromanage estrogen. And these are the types of things that these fitness influencers will focus on, because if they can create a problem or create fear in you, then they can sell you a solution. And they're either selling you a lifestyle, they're selling you supplements, they're selling you the views on their podcast, they're selling you the programs that they sell, but they're selling you something. And if we understand that if a person is otherwise healthy and doesn't have a reason to adjust a dysregulated hormone because it's not dysregulated, then our life becomes a lot simpler.
You put that so well and really cemented her content for me in terms of what she's doing, and also how hypocritical it sounds across the board and how you can poke holes in it and cracks. It's the same. You've probably seen his content. I brought him up on the podcast before. Unfortunately, he is British. He's Eddie Abu.
I know who. Yeah,
exactly.
The second you started that transition, I was like, I know exactly where we're going.
When you mentioned orthorexia, he comes immediately to mind, where I've been there kind of in that orthorexic, like, hey, I have to eat a certain way, my foods, take Tupperware to my cousins and wouldn't eat the food they provide me because it didn't align with my diet. I'd only eat brown rice, not white rice, because whatever reason I had in my head that was fine.
Let me put just a caveat in play, not to completely cut you off. If you are somebody, because you compete, right?
Yes.
Okay. If you're a competitor and you have a good relationship with food and you've got a competition coming up, there's nothing wrong with bringing your Tupperware. You're weeks out from a competition, and that's the way it is. So you want to enjoy your life by visiting your family, your friends, but you've got this goal in mind. That's completely fine. If you're bringing a scale out to dinner at a restaurant and you're a normal person, or you're wearing your continuous glucose monitor at a restaurant, you're right. That's a completely different situation. And it's disheartening to see people going through these things because they've been influenced by people like Eddie or Jesse, I don't remember how to pronounce her last name, the glucose goddess. If these people are causing this disordered eating tendency in you, I think that that's one of the most abhorrent things that people can do, because we're supposed to be here to help people.
Yeah.
And Eddie is an interesting example of this too, because I don't think that Eddie really understands what he says when he talks. And so I think that some other people that are pushing these things kind of understand it, and they just don't care because it makes them famous and brings them money. I don't think that Eddie actually knows what he's saying. And correct me if I'm wrong, is he carnivore at this point?
Not that I believe. I know he likes avocados and eggs a lot, but I don't think I don't think he pushes carnivore as such.
So it's interesting. I remember a post of his not too long ago, and he always talks about how he has these very specific things and he eats in a diet, and you see very little fiber and other roughage outside of the avocado, which is certainly really beneficial for overall health, for blood lipids, for metabolic control and all these things. And I remember he made a post and his fasting glucose was in the diabetic range. And he's like, it's not a problem because I'm eating a healthy diet of like red meats and eggs. And it's like, dude, there's more to this. There's more to nutrition than just red meat and eggs. And this is not vilifying red meat and eggs, because lean red meat is perfectly fine. Eggs are perfectly fine, assuming you don't have a genetic disorder that causes a high blood cholesterol from intake of cholesterol, which is more rare, but it happens. And so we're essentially slowly watching Eddie kill himself online in real time. And I'm wondering when this is really going to hit the fan, because so many people are following those recommendations. And I don't think that they're realizing that, like, when he drops his bloods and he says, okay, well, look, my testosterone is doing really well, and this is doing really well, and this is doing really well. And that fasting blood glucose doesn't matter. Let's move on from that. It's like, whoa, go back to the one really big red flag you just posted up. And it's amazing what people on social media can do, right? If you just say things with an air of confidence, and particularly if you're yelling it seems to work really well.
Yeah, the simpler the better. Just say, pick up this food item and say this is shit, and
Uh-huh.
people will believe you because it's in a package. And yeah, processed food's terrible always. So
Yeah.
I like that you brought up the context. By the way, when I'm talking about my situation of Tupperware to a cousin's, that wasn't prior to competing at all. That was just me and like a trying to gain muscle, eating plenty of food, and ignorant and young, and didn't know any better. So it's that other example of taking a scale to a restaurant. Like I don't think I'd even want to go and eat out at that point. That was like where I was at with things. And that was because I'd been told, oh, there's the good foods and bad foods, like clean and dirty. And that's where I see Eddie going down. And I think the way he speaks probably appeals to a younger audience, like just plain simple, some swearing, it's entertaining. And so, yeah, they kind of want to go down that route. But like you said, not only psychologically, there could be issues with people being unnecessarily restrictive, and that could have social consequences for them. Physiologically, they could be causing themselves problems. Actually, it's funny you mentioned the fasting blood glucose, because I think I've seen a few carnivores recently talk about their blood work. And now all of a sudden, they're like, honey is all right. Maybe have some fruit in the diet.
Yeah. Well, so the one concern I'm pretty anti-carnivore. I'm also anti-vegan though. And I think whenever I talk about these things, people really assume if I talk anti-carnivore, they assume that I'm vegan. If I talk anti-vegan, they assume that I'm carnivore. But I think that it's pretty obvious that the human body is meant to be an omnivore. The carnivore is the rage right now because it's the fad of the year. The issue with carnivore is that you will certainly, particularly if you have some body fat, you will certainly see blood markers start to improve. You will certainly feel better. You will certainly start to see body composition changes. And this is really motivating for a lot of people. And it gives them that buy-in to carnivore. One thing that I would really stress is long-term plants. It's so weird that we're at a stage in life that we have to tell people this. Fruits and veggies are good for you, and they have a lot of benefits. Your GI tract, your cardiovascular health, your anti-cancer benefits as you age. I mean, you're going to really increase cancer risk with a carnivore diet long term. And we haven't seen carnivore popular long enough to start to see this. You know, you take out carnivore long enough, and thank God that people can't sustain it for supremely long periods of time, but you could potentially see a large increase in cancer rates. But the number one thing that I would really like to point out, that anybody that is completely sold on the carnivore diet, make sure that you're keeping an eye on coronary artery calcium scores. Because this is something that when you're losing large amounts of body fat, you'll see a lot of these blood lipids, at least for a time, start to improve, because I mean, there's nothing better for your body than losing excess body fat. And transiently, any of these diets that creates that calorie deficit will show you benefits. I mean, veganism will show you significant benefits. If you're overweight and you switch to veganism, and you lose body fat. Carnivore does the same thing. But if you look at some of the research around carnivore and coronary artery calcium scores, it's very disturbing. I mean, it almost doubles in a short period of time in a lot of people. And this is a very real indicator that you are going to potentially have a heart attack later in life if you continue down this road. And this is one of those blood markers that nobody's watching. And so everybody says, like, you know, look at the bloods that I'm taking, you know, my testosterone is better. But you also have to understand that when they're doing this, all of a sudden they have the buy-in for this new diet. And now they're training for the first time. And now they're, you know, being consistent with their nutrition for the first time.
Yeah.
And now they're sleeping for the first time. And so a lot of times this buy-in is misattributed to some of the other benefits that they're getting, because they're finally taking it seriously, because they saw that drop immediately in muscle glycogen and water weight from going carnivore. And now they finally found something that works. And so we have to be very careful that we're aware of what's actually happening, and not just what somebody on social media is telling us is happening.
Yeah, so important to do your own research and understand your body and what's going under the hood, especially if you do something extreme that isn't typical for the human body. Like you said, we're kind of born omnivores. I would agree with that. I'm interested, if you've still got time, Alan, on veganism. You mentioned that you're not pro-veganism. Like, in fact, I think you said you're anti-veganism. And I was under kind of the assumption for most individuals, if they're kind of keeping an eye on their protein, they supplement with the things that a vegan diet can't provide them, that they can sustain like a overall healthy diet. Where are your kind of views surrounding veganism?
So my issue with veganism is that if you're doing one of these things like vegetarianism or veganism for a moral choice, I'm completely fine with that. I think that's a very viable reason to do this. If you're doing it because you think it is somehow healthier, that's a problem, because it's
Got you.
not. I mean, that's what all of the research points towards. And so my distaste for it has been grown from things like Game Changers and all those types of things, where they're essentially misattributing the research or the examples. They're like, look at this bodybuilder, he's vegan, and look at how great he looks. Well, he became vegan 8 months ago. It's,
Yeah.
you know, and so we get some real problems. And like you said, if your goal is to maximize physique and performance, it's going to be very, very difficult to have a vegan diet and actually hit your protein needs. Very, very difficult. You're going to have to supplement pretty much extensively, because there are very few vegan foods that are high in protein, but then also low in calories, because they typically come with a lot of carbs. They typically come with a lot of fat alongside. So you're going to have to supplement. There are those gaps in other micronutrients: iron, carnitine, creatine, B vitamins, some other vitamins that you're going to have to start supplementing with. So you're essentially, if you're doing this for health, you're essentially creating a much, much more difficult diet to maintain for no reason. And it's great that we see the research that compares a vegan diet to a standard Western diet, and it shows benefits. Yeah, that happens, but we're setting the bar really low if that's our comparison. When you look at the breadth of research and you compare it to something like a smart Mediterranean diet, the Mediterranean diet comes out on top every single time. And so if we're talking about this as a should I be doing this for health reason, I'm anti-vegan. If we're talking about this as should we be doing this for a moral reason because I love animals, I can get behind you with that. As long as you understand that your diet is not optimal and you're not doing it for health or performance or whatever it is, you're doing it because you care about animals. And that's great. And I think that that's wonderful. And at least you're being honest about what the pros and cons are in this situation. And for many people, the pro of, sparing animal lives is much greater than any of the cons. And that's fine.
Cool. Yeah,
so
I'm
hopefully
glad
that
I
clears it
asked
up
you.
a little bit.
Yeah, it does. It completely clears up for me, because I was thinking that maybe you thought that it couldn't be something that could be used as effectively as maybe. Oh, actually, no. That's I guess a question for me, but it clears it up quite well, because you're anti it in terms of unless it's like moral. If you think it's healthier, that's kind of. I agree with you completely. It's not going to be inherently healthier. Do you think you could get just as good results, or do you think you're leaving something on the table if you did everything I mentioned in terms of all the gaps that a vegan diet would provide? You supplement to make sure that they're no longer gaps. Do you think you could still see as good results as someone on that omnivore diet? Or do you think they're going to be slightly subpar?
I don't, but I can't prove that objectively. But here's my thought process there, and people can agree and disagree with this as they want. I think that in nutrition research, we try to pretend that we know more than we do, especially when things come to, gut health and all these other types of benefits. We know relatively little. I think that there are likely zoonutrients, there are likely forms of vitamins and minerals that you get from natural foods, natural meats, dairy, eggs, that we probably don't get. I mean, EPA and DHA is going to be hard to get in the most optimal forms if you're a rote vegan. There's a lot of nutrients that we probably don't understand as well as we think that we do. And so I don't think that you could take veganism and make it as good in any way compared to a smart omnivore diet. Now, I will say that I believe that you could do this with something like pescatarianism or a vegetarianism that allows you to have like dairy or eggs or something like that. I believe that there is a much greater chance that that can work out just fine. And in those cases, I mean, I have a lot of vegetarian clients and pescatarian clients, and you can make a diet for those people very easily in comparison to a vegan diet. A vegan diet is very difficult because when you start to have to, like, say somebody's overweight and you start to have to take calories down, almost everywhere that you take calories down also takes down their protein. And so you're like, okay, great, we're losing weight, but like, it's really hard to keep you in an optimal body composition range, and that's not even counting the types of micronutrients that we might be losing, because we're choosing based off of where we're hamstrung into choosing rather than what we could be choosing if we had more options. So I'm much more open to the idea that a regular vegetarianism or pescatarianism could do that. Yes. I'm skeptical that veganism can do that.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things. I'm always dig into this subject of veganism because my girlfriend is vegan. She doesn't train or anything. She's just for it for moral reasons.
And that's fine.
And so
That's great.
yeah, exactly. And I'm just like, I'm just not as moral as you, and I would struggle as a bodybuilder
Yeah.
in regards. Like, I love animals, but not that far to the degree of which I would completely remove animal products from my diet. I follow mostly a vegetarian diet. But for many of the reasons you mentioned, it is quite challenging. And I'm not to say like, hey, you can definitely, I think I see people do it and they compete and they do great. And I think you can do that. But I think it does lead, it comes back to that. It's quite extreme to remove all animal products, and it leads to like a more challenging lifestyle, and something that I'm currently not affording myself to do that. And subconsciously, there's a little bit of me similar to your arguments here. Maybe I'd be leaving something on the table in terms of health, or like mostly it's health and ability to like grow muscle and to kind of be my best self,
Yeah.
which I'm not comfortable with.
And I think I think that there's certainly enough research to suggest that a plant-based diet is a smart thing. And, people will say plant-based and they'll assume that you initially mean veganism, but plant-based doesn't necessarily mean veganism. I mean, you can still eat meat and dairy and all those things on a plant-based diet. And I find it really funny anytime somebody brings up the idea of like anti-nutrients and how these are going to cause problems. It's so far from reality that it's not even funny. There's only one situation that I can think of offhand. I'm sure there's probably two or three or so, but there's only one situation in a practical sense that I can agree with the anti-nutrient angle. If for some reason a random dude is housing handfuls of red kidney beans without cooking them, yeah, you're going to cause some problems. But the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to induce vomiting pretty badly, and then that's a self-limiting situation. But there's this whole idea of like anti-nutrients and driving people away from some of the most beneficial foods in our food system, fruits and veggies. I mean, it's undisputed in science that these things offer significant benefits. The fact that we're pointing out that some might have some lectins or some of these other things that either get cooked out in the preparation methods, because nobody's eating beans raw. So when we cook them out, the wash gets rid of it, the cooking process gets rid of it, and then it becomes a completely normal thing. And again, you're from the UK. If you couldn't eat beans, or people couldn't be healthy on beans, your population would be who we would see being like consistently sick, as probably one of the higher bean eating countries in the world. And so you have that real world proof that this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, these other ones like broccoli, I did a whole one on broccoli and the, the oxalates and some of the other things that are in these foods. And it's just, the dose is the poison. And there's simply not enough in these foods to cause any sort of health problem in an otherwise healthy person, or even create a problem where, oh, I'm not getting the benefits of broccoli because it's got some of these anti-nutrients in there. So therefore it's just roughage and there's no point in eating it. That's entirely not true either. There's not a single one of these vegetables that you can point out that if you look at this objectively, you can't find benefits to the intake of these foods. And so again, social media strikes.
Yeah, it's wild. Actually, it makes me think of a lot of the kind of poor content on social media surrounding particularly nutrition, but also training is,
Yeah.
I mean, it comes back to the same with the EMG, is they try and pinpoint these mechanisms or chemicals or things, and they extrapolate completely. And they don't look at real world data. They don't look at the bigger picture at all. But when you zoom out, everything becomes a much simpler, like calorie deficit, like, hey, progressive overload, these sort of concepts. And it's
I
so
love what you're saying.
frustrating.
I love what you're saying here, because when you find a person that really knows what they're doing, the answer for almost every question that is asked, sure, there's nuance, but the answer for almost every question that is asked in health and fitness, the answer is get your training down, get your nutrition down, sleep, stress relieve, drink water. Okay, well, how do I get stronger? Get your training down, get your nutrition down, stress relieve, sleep, drink water. How do I improve my gut health? How do I improve my ability to handle blood glucose? It's the same answer. And so what we're seeing with these guys that will come out and they'll do the whole EMG stuff. And yes, there are some guys that will put out EMG information, and it does make sense in the way that they're presenting it. So I don't want to say that everybody that mentions EMG is doing it wrong. We're just talking about what we're seeing predominantly. Anybody that puts out stuff like that, anybody that goes out and says, eat real foods, shit, fuck guys, anybody that goes out and tells you to monitor your blood glucose, at the core, what they're doing is they're trying to appear unique, because if you can appear unique on social media, that will get you a following, and it gets you a following through one of two ways. The algorithm is really built to support people that make hyperbolic or unique claims. And the reason that happens, and it doesn't matter if it's right or not, it just matters that it's different or that it's hyperbolic. And the reason that happens is because if I go out and tell people you need to eat right, you need to train, you need to sleep, people are like, yeah, I know, that's fine. And they'll immediately scroll on. If I tell you that, like, having 6 eggs, 3 olives and chicken, and then blend it together into a shake. This is actually something that Eddie did. Blend it together in a shake and then drink that shake. People will be like, holy shit. And they'll make comments about it. They'll be like, ooh, that's gross, or this is amazing, or I'm going to try this, or whatever. And so the people that are bought into that type of thinking will hit like and comment and share. And then there'll be people that'll be like, this is ridiculous. Like, what are you doing? Or they'll make some claim about, the continuous glucose monitoring. You'll make a comment, this is why this doesn't make sense. And so you're trying to counteract the bad information that's out there. But in reality, what we're doing is we're creating a double hit to the algorithm for this person, which ends up pushing their social media content even more. So it reinforces this idea to this person that, oh, if I keep making these claims, I'm going to keep seeing more and more likes. I'm going to see more and more shares. I'm going to see all of these social media benefits from making these dramatic claims. And that's why you'll often see some of the people with the largest audiences are some of the worst sources of information out there, because they're taking advantage of human psychology and how the social media algorithm works. Whereas we'll sit at a more moderate level, trying to put out, better information. And there's a reason that there are some drawbacks to that. But hopefully the information that we put out can gain some traction. And, if we're able to help at least a few people in a meaningful manner, that can make up for it.
I think that's a great way to round out this conversation, Allan. It's been tremendous chatting with you. I couldn't agree more with the comments made there. And I have to highly recommend people go and follow you over on Instagram. I'll make sure your Instagram handle is linked in the bio. Actually, for people who are listening and they can't be bothered to go click it in the bio, what is your Instagram?
My Instagram is @Dr. Allan Bacon. That's ALLAN. Just have to spell that first name right. Or you could go to MauiAthletics.com, and the social media links are in the footer.
Perfect. Yeah, I have your Instagram. I have your website linked as well. And I'm sure people really enjoy this. And I have to draw you back on. And so we can have some more fitness discussion and chats about, I don't know, maybe you end up debunking some more interesting and fun things. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Allan. This has been a lot of fun. Is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with, or anywhere else they should be checking?
No, that's it. But thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on, and it's always great talking to you.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.